The blood on the wagon wheel had dried to a rust-brown color that matched the desert earth, and Preston Cole knew before he even dismounted that whoever had been here was either dead or wishing they were. He had been riding for 3 days straight across the Nevada territory, making his way from Virginia City back to his small ranch outside Genoa, when he spotted the overturned wagon in the distance. The sun was setting behind the Sierra Nevada mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if not for the buzzards circling overhead. Preston was 32 years old and had spent the last decade of his life learning to mind his own business. The West taught harsh lessons to those who stuck their noses where they did not belong, but something about the scene ahead made him urge his horse forward, his hand instinctively moving to the revolver at his hip. As he drew closer, he could make out more details. The wagon had been ransacked, its contents scattered across the ground. Crates lay broken open, their goods stolen or destroyed. And then he saw her. A woman sat slumped against the wagon wheel, her wrist chained to one of the spokes. Her dress was torn and filthy, her dark hair hanging in tangled masses around her face. For a moment, Preston thought she might be dead, but then her head lifted slightly and he caught sight of her eyes. Even from a distance, even through the obvious pain and exhaustion, those eyes held a fierce determination that stopped him in his tracks. "Water," she croaked as he dismounted. Her voice was barely above a whisper, ravaged by thirst and the desert heat. Preston grabbed his canteen and approached carefully, scanning the area for any signs of the men who had done this. The tracks were at least a day old, maybe more. They had headed north toward the mountains. He knelt beside the woman and held the canteen to her cracked lips, tilting it gently so she would not choke. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin, and he had to pull it back to keep her from making herself sick. "Slow," he said quietly. "Take it slow." Her eyes focused on him properly for the first time, and he was struck by their color. A deep green that reminded him of the forests back east before he had come west after the war. She was young, maybe 25 or 26, with delicate features that were currently marred by bruises and cuts. "The chain," she said when she had caught her breath. "Please." Preston examined the iron shackle around her wrist. It was crude but effective, secured with a heavy padlock. He could see where she had tried to work herself free. The skin beneath the metal was raw and bleeding. "I am going to need to break it," he said, studying the lock. "I do not have anything that will pick this." She nodded, her jaw set. "Do what you have to do." He retrieved a hammer and chisel from his saddlebag, tools he carried for various ranch repairs. "This is going to hurt," he warned. "I will try to be careful, but I need you to hold as still as possible." "Just do it," she said, and he heard steel in her voice despite her weakened state. Preston positioned the chisel carefully against the chain link closest to the wheel, away from her wrist. He struck it once, twice, 3 times. The metal resisted, but on the 4th blow it began to give. 2 more strikes and the link shattered. The woman sagged forward and he caught her before she could fall. "Easy," he said, supporting her weight. She was lighter than she should be, clearly half-starved. "When did you last eat?" 3 days, she whispered. "Maybe 4. I lost track." Preston helped her to a more comfortable position and went to retrieve some jerky and hardtack from his supplies. It was not much, but it would help. As she ate slowly, he examined the rest of the wagon. The carnage told a clear story. Raiders had attacked the wagon, killed the driver and anyone else with it, and taken what they wanted. But why chain this woman to the wheel? Why not kill her or take her with them? "My name is Preston Cole," he said, returning to her side. "I have a ranch about 15 miles south of here, near Genoa. What is your name?" She swallowed the food she had been chewing and met his eyes. "Nora Johnson. I was traveling with my uncle from Sacramento to Virginia City. He was a merchant. There were 4 men. They came out of nowhere 3 days ago. Your uncle." Her face crumpled for just a moment before she forced it back into that mask of determination. "They shot him, left him in the wagon when they pushed it over." Preston looked at the overturned wagon with new eyes. "Is he still in there?" Nora nodded, unable to speak. "I am sorry," Preston said quietly, and he meant it. He had seen too much death during the war and in the years after, but it never got easier. "We should bury him before we go." She looked at him with something like hope. "You are coming home with me," Preston said firmly. "I cannot leave you out here, and you need proper food and rest. Once you are recovered, we will figure out what comes next." Tears spilled down Nora's cheeks, cutting clean tracks through the dust and grime on her face. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." Preston considered the question. In truth, he was not entirely sure himself. The smart thing would be to give her some supplies and directions to the nearest town. Getting involved in other people's troubles rarely ended well. But looking at her sitting there, broken but not defeated, chained like an animal and left to die, he knew he could not just walk away. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. They buried Nora's uncle as the sun finished setting, digging a grave in the hard Nevada earth by lantern light. Preston found the man's body in the wagon as Nora had said, shot through the chest. He was a portly man in his 50s, dressed in a merchant's fine clothes now soaked with blood. Preston wrapped him in a blanket before lowering him into the grave, sparing Nora the sight as much as possible. She stood over the grave when it was filled, her lips moving in silent prayer. Preston stood a respectful distance away, hat in hand. When she finished, she turned to him with red-rimmed eyes. "His name was Nora Johnson. He raised me after my parents died when I was 8. He was a good man." "I am sure he was," Preston said gently. They rode through the night, Nora sitting in front of Preston on his horse since her uncle's team had been stolen. She was so exhausted that she dozed against his chest, despite the discomfort of the ride, and Preston found himself adjusting his arms to hold her more securely. She smelled of sweat and blood and desert dust, but underneath it, he caught hints of something floral, some perfume or soap she had used before all this happened. The ranch came into view as dawn broke over the mountains. It was not much to look at, just a small house Preston had built himself, a barn and a corral for his horses. He ran cattle on the surrounding land, enough to make a modest living. It was lonely work, but Preston had grown accustomed to loneliness. After what he had seen during the war, the solitude was often a comfort. Nora stirred as they approached, lifting her head to look around. "This is your home." "It is," Preston said. "Not fancy, but it is sturdy and the roof does not leak." He helped her down from the horse, steadying her when her legs nearly buckled. The ride had taken what little strength she had left. He guided her into the house, settling her into the only chair with cushions. "I am going to heat some water," he said. "You need to clean those wounds and you need real food." "I can help." Nora started to stand. "You can help by sitting still and not collapsing on my floor," Preston said, more sharply than he intended. He softened his tone. "Please, let me do this." She sank back into the chair, and he saw her hands trembling. Shock was setting in now that the immediate danger had passed. Preston worked quickly, stoking the fire and setting water to heat. He made a simple stew from dried beef, potatoes, and carrots, letting it simmer while he prepared a basin for washing. When everything was ready, he hesitated. "The water is hot. You will want to clean up. I can step outside while you do." Nora looked down at herself, seeming to notice for the first time just how filthy she was. "I do not think I can manage alone," she admitted quietly. "My wrist, and I am so tired." Preston felt heat rise in his face. He was a gentleman, or at least he tried to be, but she was right. In her current state, she would likely hurt herself trying to wash. "I will help," he said, "but only as much as you need. I will not dishonor you." She gave him a small, sad smile. "After 3 days chained to a wagon wheel, waiting to die, I think propriety is the least of my concerns." He helped her remove the ruins of her dress, keeping his eyes respectfully averted as much as possible while still assisting. The bruises on her arms and shoulders made his jaw clench. Those raiders had not just chained her. They had beaten her too. He cleaned her wounds gently, washing away the dried blood and dirt, applying salve to the worst of the cuts. The shackle mark on her wrist was the most concerning. The skin was rubbed raw, and he could see the beginning of infection. He cleaned it thoroughly, making her hiss with pain, and bandaged it carefully. "I have a spare shirt and some old trousers that might fit you," he said, fetching them from his trunk. "They will be more comfortable than what you were wearing." She dressed in his clothes, and despite the seriousness of the situation, Preston found himself thinking she looked good in them. The shirt was too big, hanging loose on her frame, and she had to roll up the trouser legs, but color was already returning to her face now that she was clean and warm. They ate the stew in silence, Nora consuming 2 bowls before finally pushing back from the table. "Thank you," she said. "I do not know how I will ever repay you for what you have done." "You do not owe me anything," Preston said. "Get some rest. We can talk more when you have slept." He gave her his bed, insisting despite her protests, and made himself comfortable on the floor with some blankets. Within minutes, he heard her breathing even out as sleep claimed her. Preston lay awake for a while longer, staring at the ceiling beams he had hewn himself, wondering what he had gotten himself into. Nora slept for nearly 16 hours, waking only when the sun was high the next day. Preston was outside mending a fence when he heard movement from the house. He found her standing in the doorway, looking better than she had, but still pale and drawn. "How do you feel?" he asked. "Like I was beaten and left to die in the desert," she said, but there was a hint of humor in her voice. "But better than yesterday, much better." "Good. Are you hungry?" They fell into an easy routine over the next few days. Nora's strength returned gradually, and with it came glimpses of the person she had been before the attack. She was sharp-witted and educated, able to discuss everything from Shakespeare to politics. Her uncle had been progressive enough to ensure she received a proper education, something rare for women in these times. She helped around the ranch as she recovered, insisting on earning her keep despite Preston's protests. She cooked, which Preston appreciated since his own cooking skills were limited to basic survival fare. She mended his clothes, which had been steadily deteriorating due to his poor sewing. She even helped tend the horses, showing a natural affinity with the animals. "My uncle kept horses," she explained one afternoon as she brushed down Preston's mare. "I used to ride every day when I was younger." "Do you have any other family?" Preston asked. "Anyone who will be worried about you?" Nora's hand stilled on the brush. "No, my uncle was the last. I was traveling with him because I had nowhere else to go. My situation in Sacramento had become difficult." Preston heard the story she was not telling, the careful way she chose her words. "A man," she looked at him sharply, then away. "A man who thought my uncle's money gave him certain rights. When I refused him, he made sure I could not find respectable work anywhere in the city. My uncle decided it would be better if I came with him to Virginia City, made a fresh start there. And now I do not know," Nora said quietly. "I have no money, no prospects, no family. I suppose I could try to find work in Genoa or one of the other towns, but the story will follow me. A woman alone, living with a bachelor, even for innocent reasons. My reputation will be ruined. Preston had been thinking about this same problem. Having Nora in his home was improper, would cause talk if anyone found out. But the alternative, sending her away when she had nowhere to go, was unthinkable. Somewhere over the past few days, she had stopped being a responsibility and started being something else. Something he was not quite ready to name. "You could stay," he said carefully. "Keep helping around the ranch. I could pay you wages like a housekeeper." Nora set down the brush and faced him. "Preston, you know that would not solve the problem. People would assume the worst regardless of the truth. Unless—" She trailed off, color rising in her cheeks. "Unless what?" "Unless we made it legitimate. A business arrangement, if you will." She was not looking at him now, focusing intently on the horse's mane. Many frontier marriages are practical arrangements. A man needs help running his home and ranch. A woman needs security and protection. There does not have to be anything more to it than that. Preston felt his heart hammering in his chest. Marriage. She was proposing marriage. Part of him wanted to agree immediately, which surprised him. He had been alone for so long, had convinced himself he preferred it that way. But these past days with Nora had shown him what he had been missing. The house felt alive with her in it. The work felt lighter when shared. And if he was being honest with himself, he looked forward to seeing her smile, to hearing her laugh when something amused her, to the conversations they had in the evenings. But was that enough reason to marry someone? And was it fair to her to tie herself to a man she barely knew just for safety? "You do not have to answer now," Nora said quickly, misreading his silence. "I know it is sudden. I just thought, practically speaking, it might be a solution that benefits us both." "It would have to be a real marriage," Preston heard himself say. "Not just on paper. I would not trap you in a false arrangement. If we did this, we would do it properly." Nora turned to look at him, those green eyes searching his face. "What are you saying?" "I am saying I have enjoyed having you here. I am saying the house feels empty when you are not in it. I am saying that if we are going to do this, we should do it because we want to try building something real together, not just because it is convenient." He took a breath. "I know we have not known each other long, but I would like the chance to know you better. As my wife, if you will have me." A slow smile spread across Nora's face, the first real smile he had seen from her. It transformed her, chasing away the shadows and showing him the woman she was before tragedy struck. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married a week later in Genoa by the town's circuit preacher. It was a simple ceremony with no guests, just the two of them and the preacher's wife as witness. Preston bought Nora a simple gold band from the general store, and she wore a blue dress the storekeeper's wife had helped her sew from fabric Preston had purchased. Standing before the preacher, repeating the vows that would bind them together, Preston felt the weight of what they were doing. This was not how he had imagined getting married back when he was young and full of romantic notions. But looking at Nora, seeing the determination and hope in her eyes, he thought maybe this was better. They were going into this with clear heads and honest intentions. When the preacher told him to kiss his bride, Preston leaned in carefully, giving Nora every chance to pull away. She did not. The kiss was brief and chaste, but he felt something shift between them, some invisible line being crossed. They spent their wedding night much as they had spent the previous nights, in separate beds. Preston had moved into the barn to give Nora privacy while they figured out their new arrangement. But as he lay in the hayloft that night, listening to the horses moving below, he found himself thinking about his wife. His wife. The word felt strange and right all at once. In the house, Nora lay awake as well, staring at the ceiling and touching the ring on her finger. She had agreed to this marriage for practical reasons, she told herself. It was a way to survive, to have security in a world that offered women precious little of either. But she would be lying if she said that was the only reason. Preston Cole was unlike any man she had ever known. He was quiet and reserved, but underneath that exterior, she sensed depths she wanted to explore. He had saved her life and asked nothing in return. He had offered her marriage and promised to make it real, to try for something genuine rather than just a convenient arrangement. She thought about the kiss at the altar, brief as it was. She thought about the way he looked at her when he thought she was not watching, with something like wonder in his eyes. She thought about his hands, calloused and strong but gentle when he had cleaned her wounds. And she admitted to herself that she wanted this to be more than just a practical arrangement. She wanted it to be real. The next morning, Preston came in from the barn to find breakfast already made. Nora stood at the stove, her hair pinned up, wearing the blue dress from the wedding. She looked domestic and beautiful, and Preston felt that shift again, that sense of rightness. "Good morning," she said, and there was something shy in her voice now. "I made coffee." "Thank you," Preston said, sitting at the table. He watched her move around his kitchen like she belonged there, and he supposed she did now. This was her home as much as his. They ate in comfortable silence, but when the meal was finished and the dishes cleared, Nora remained standing by the table, clearly wanting to say something. "What is it?" Preston asked gently. "I was thinking," Nora began, then stopped. She tried again. "We are married now, properly married, and I thought maybe it would be better if we shared the house, if you moved back in from the barn." Preston felt heat rise in his face. "I do not want to make you uncomfortable." "You would not be," Nora said quickly. "I trust you, and this is your home, our home now. It does not make sense for you to sleep in the barn." "There is only one bed," Preston pointed out. "I know." Nora was blushing now too, but she held his gaze. "We are married. It is allowed." Preston stood slowly, crossing to where she stood. He was taller than her by several inches, and she had to tilt her head back to look at him. "Nora, I do not want you to feel obligated to anything just because we said vows. We can take this as slowly as you need." She reached up and placed her hand against his chest, right over his heart. "What if I do not want to go slowly?" He covered her hand with his own, feeling his pulse quicken. "Then we will not," he said softly, and leaned down to kiss her. This kiss was nothing like the one at the altar. This was deep and searching, a promise and a question all at once. Nora's arms came up around his neck, and Preston pulled her closer, one hand at her waist and the other tangling in her hair. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. "Well," Nora said, slightly dazed. "That was better than the first one." Preston laughed, a sound that surprised him. He could not remember the last time he had laughed like that, free and genuine. "Much better," he agreed. They spent the day working side by side, but everything felt different now. When Preston's hand brushed against Nora's as he passed her a tool, it felt intentional. When Nora smiled at him over lunch, it felt intimate. The air between them crackled with anticipation and promise. That night, Preston brought his things back into the house. Nora had changed the bedding and tidied the room, making space for his belongings. They moved around each other carefully at first, both nervous, but when they finally lay down together, it felt natural. Preston pulled Nora into his arms, and she rested her head on his chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Tell me about yourself," she said quietly. "I know so little about you." Preston was quiet for a moment, gathering his thoughts. "I grew up in Pennsylvania. My father was a farmer. I have 2 brothers, both still back east. I fought in the war, came west after because I could not stand being back there anymore. Too many memories of things I wanted to forget." "Do you miss them? Your family?" "Sometimes," Preston admitted, "but we were never particularly close. My brothers married local girls and took over the farm. There was not much there for me." "No sweetheart you left behind?" Nora asked, trying to keep her tone light. "No," Preston said firmly. "There was a girl once before the war, but she married someone else while I was gone. It hurt at the time, but looking back, we would not have been happy together. She wanted things I could not give her. A life in town, society, things like that. She would have hated it out here." Nora tilted her head to look up at him. "And what about me? Will I hate it out here?" Preston smiled, brushing a strand of hair back from her face. "I do not think so. I think you are stronger than you know. You survived 3 days in the desert when most people would have given up. You picked yourself up and kept going. That takes real strength." "I was terrified," Nora confessed. "Every moment of those 3 days I was sure I was going to die. I kept thinking about all the things I had not done, all the life I had not lived. And then you came, and it was like a miracle." "Not a miracle," Preston said. "Just chance. I happened to be riding that way." "Maybe," Nora said softly. "Or maybe it was meant to be." They fell silent, holding each other as the night deepened around them. Eventually, holding turned to touching, gentle exploration as they learned each other's bodies. Preston was careful with her, mindful of her healing wounds, but Nora was not fragile. She met him with equal passion, equal desire, and when they finally came together as husband and wife in truth, it felt like coming home. Afterward, lying tangled together in the dark, Preston felt something in his chest loosen, some tight knot he had been carrying for years. He had not realized how lonely he had been until he was not lonely anymore. "I think I am falling in love with you," he whispered, not sure if Nora was still awake. "Good," she whispered back, her lips curving into a smile against his shoulder. "Because I think I am falling in love with you too." The weeks that followed were some of the happiest of Preston's life. He and Nora settled into married life with surprising ease. They worked together during the day, tending the ranch and the animals. Nora turned out to have a good head for numbers and began helping Preston with the ranch accounts, finding ways to save money and increase efficiency. In the evenings, they would sit together, talking or reading or simply enjoying each other's company. The physical attraction between them only grew stronger. Preston found himself constantly amazed by his wife, by her strength and resilience, by the way she laughed at his jokes, by the way she looked in the morning with her hair loose around her shoulders. Nora seemed equally enamored, often catching him around the waist as he passed by for a quick kiss, or running her fingers through his hair as they sat together in the evening. But their happiness was not to last uninterrupted. One afternoon, about 6 weeks after their wedding, Preston was in the barn when he heard the sound of horses approaching. Multiple horses, coming fast. He stepped out into the yard, his hand moving instinctively to his gun. 4 men rode up to the house, pulling their horses to a stop in a cloud of dust. Preston recognized the type immediately. Hard men, dangerous men, with the look of those who lived on the wrong side of the law. His blood ran cold when he realized these might be the same men who had attacked Nora's wagon. "Help you gentlemen," Preston called out, keeping his voice level. The largest of the men, a bear of a person with a thick beard, grinned nastily. "We are looking for someone. A woman. Dark hair, green eyes. She would have been traveling through here about 2 months back." "Lots of people travel through here," Preston said carefully. "Cannot say I recall anyone matching that description." "See, that is funny," another man said, this one lean and mean-looking with a scar across his cheek. "Because we have it on good authority from the shopkeeper in Genoa that you recently got married, to a dark-haired woman. Now that is quite a coincidence, is it not?" Preston felt fury building in his chest. He should have known the secret could not last in a small town. Someone had seen them, talked, and now these men had come looking. "My wife is none of your concern," Preston said flatly. I suggest you move along." "Cannot do that," the bearded man said. "You see, that woman belongs to someone. Fellow by the name of Marcus Dennison. He paid good money for her, and we aim to collect what is owed." Preston's mind raced. Dennison. Nora had mentioned that name, the man in Sacramento who had harassed her. But she had never said he claimed to own her, had never suggested anything like that. "My wife does not belong to anyone but herself," Preston said, "and she is not going anywhere with you." The four men exchanged looks. "That is not how this works, friend," the bearded man said. "Now you can hand her over peaceful-like, or we can do this the hard way. Your choice." Preston's hand tightened on his gun. He was fast, probably faster than any of these men individually, but 4 against 1 were bad odds. He was calculating his chances when the door to the house opened and Nora stepped out. "No," Preston said sharply. "Nora, get back inside." But Nora walked forward until she stood beside him, her chin lifted in defiance. "I know why you are here," she said to the men. "Marcus Dennison sent you because I refused to marry him. But I do not owe him anything. I am a free woman, and I am legally married to Preston Cole. Whatever claim Dennison thinks he has is invalid." The bearded man laughed. "See, that is where you are wrong, sweetheart. Dennison had a contract with your uncle. You were to marry him in exchange for the money your uncle owed. When you ran off, your uncle broke that contract. That makes you stolen property." "That is insane," Nora said, but Preston could hear the fear creeping into her voice. "My uncle would never have agreed to such a thing." "Desperate men do desperate things," the scarred man said. "And your uncle was pretty desperate there at the end. Gambling debts, failed investments. Dennison offered him a way out." Preston saw Nora's face go pale, saw the moment she realized it might be true. Her uncle had been increasingly worried about money in the months before the trip. She had thought it was just the normal concerns of business, but what if it had been more? "Even if that were true," Preston said, "Nora's uncle is dead. Any contract died with him." "That is not how Dennison sees it," the bearded man said. "He wants what he paid for, so we are taking the woman, and if you are smart, you will step aside." "That is not happening," Preston said and drew his gun. Everything happened fast. The four men went for their weapons, but Preston was faster. He shot the bearded man in the shoulder before diving behind a water trough, pulling Nora down with him. Bullets thudded into the wood above their heads as the other 3 men returned fire. "Stay down," Preston ordered, then popped up to fire again. He hit one of the other men in the leg, dropping him from his horse. But there were still 3 of them and only 1 of him, and he was running low on ammunition. Then Nora was pressing his spare revolver into his hand, the one he kept in the house. "I reloaded it," she said breathlessly. Preston looked at her in amazement, then grinned. "I love you," he said, and turned to fire again. The fight lasted another few minutes before the 3 men, still capable of riding, decided the woman was not worth it. They grabbed their wounded companions and rode off, the bearded man shouting threats over his shoulder about how this was not over. Preston waited until they were out of sight before lowering his guns. He was shaking slightly with adrenaline. Beside him, Nora was trembling harder. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking her for injuries. "No," she managed. "Are you?" "I am fine." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You should not have come out. You should have stayed hidden." "They were going to kill you," Nora said, her voice muffled against his chest. "I could not just hide and let them kill you." Preston tilted her face up to look at him. "They might come back. Dennison clearly is not going to give up. We need to figure out what to do." "What can we do?" Nora asked desperately. "If my uncle really did sign a contract, if he really sold me, then maybe Dennison does have a legal claim. Maybe we should go to Virginia City, talk to a lawyer." "No," Preston said firmly. I do not care what kind of contract your uncle signed. You are a person, not property. No piece of paper can change that, and you are my wife. I will protect you no matter what it takes." Nora's eyes filled with tears. "I did not know. I swear to you, Preston, I did not know about any contract. If my uncle did that, it was to protect me, to keep Dennison from ruining my life in Sacramento. But I never agreed to it. I never would have agreed to it." "I know," Preston said gently. "I believe you. But we need to be smart about this. Those men will report back to Dennison. He might send more, or he might come himself. We need help." "Who would help us?" Nora asked. "We cannot go to the law if there is a legal contract. They would force me to honor it." Preston thought hard. He did not have many friends in the area, kept mostly to himself. But there was one person who might help, someone who owed him a favor. "Jackson Turner," he said. "He is the territorial judge, travels the circuit. I saved his life once when his horse threw him and he broke his leg in the middle of nowhere. He said if I ever needed anything, I should ask. I think it is time to collect on that debt." They rode to Genoa the next morning, both armed and watchful. Preston left word with the shopkeeper that he needed to speak with Judge Turner when he next came through town. In the meantime, they would stay vigilant and hope Dennison's men did not return before help arrived. The judge came through 2 weeks later, and Preston met with him at the small boarding house where he was staying. Turner was a portly man in his 60s with shrewd eyes and a reputation for fairness. He listened carefully as Preston explained the situation. "This is a delicate matter," Turner said when Preston finished. "If there truly is a contract, and if it was properly executed, then technically Dennison might have a claim. Contract law in the territories can be complicated. Surely you cannot believe a man can buy a woman like she is livestock," Preston said heatedly. "Of course not," Turner said. "But contracts for arranged marriages are not uncommon, and they are generally upheld if both parties agreed. The question is whether Nora agreed." "She did not," Preston said. "She knew nothing about it. And her uncle is dead, so we cannot get his side of the story," Turner mused. "What we need is evidence that the contract was invalid from the start. Do you know anything about the terms? How much Dennison supposedly paid?" Preston shook his head. "The men mentioned gambling debts and failed investments, but we do not know any specifics." "Then we need to find out," Turner said. "I will send some inquiries to Sacramento, see what I can learn about Dennison and his dealings with Nora's uncle. In the meantime, the fact that Nora is legally married to you does complicate matters for Dennison. He would have to prove his contract supersedes your marriage, which will be difficult." "How long will your inquiries take?" Preston asked. "A few weeks, maybe a month," Turner said. "Can you keep Nora safe that long?" "I will keep her safe as long as it takes," Preston said firmly. True to his word, Preston watched over Nora like a hawk in the days and weeks that followed. He taught her to shoot properly, drilling her until she could hit a target reliably. They reinforced the house, added a sturdy bar to the door, kept weapons within easy reach at all times. At night, Preston slept lightly, waking at the slightest sound. The constant vigilance was exhausting, but it also brought them closer together. They relied on each other completely, trusted each other with their lives. The love between them deepened from the initial spark into something solid and enduring. One evening, about 3 weeks after their meeting with the judge, Nora was helping Preston check the fence line when she suddenly stopped and pressed a hand to her stomach. "What is wrong?" Preston asked immediately, scanning the area for threats. "Nothing is wrong," Nora said, and there was wonder in her voice. "Preston, I think I am pregnant." Preston stared at her. "Are you sure?" "I am 3 weeks late, and I have been feeling sick in the mornings," Nora said. "I did not want to say anything until I was more certain, but I am fairly sure now. A baby." They were going to have a baby. Preston felt joy and terror in equal measure, joy at the thought of a child, of a family with Nora. Terror at the thought of bringing a child into the world while Dennison still threatened them. "We will figure this out," he said, pulling her into his arms. "I promise you, Nora, I will keep you both safe. Our child will grow up free and safe." Nora held him tight. "I know you will, I trust you." The answer from Judge Turner came 2 days later, delivered by a courier who rode out to the ranch. Preston tore open the letter and read it quickly, his expression growing grimmer with each line. "What does it say?" Nora asked anxiously. "The judge found evidence of the contract," Preston said. "Your uncle did owe Dennison a substantial amount of money, but the contract was not for marriage. It was a loan, pure and simple. Dennison apparently added a clause about you later, forged your uncle's signature. Turner has witnesses in Sacramento who will testify that your uncle never agreed to any arrangement involving you. So the contract is fake?" Nora asked hopefully. "The marriage clause is," Preston confirmed. "The original debt was real, but Dennison tried to use it to force you into marriage by altering the contract. Turner says that is fraud, pure and simple. He is issuing a warrant for Dennison's arrest." Nora sagged with relief. "It is over then." "Not quite," Preston said carefully. "Dennison still has to be arrested, and there is no guarantee he will go quietly. We should stay alert until we know he is in custody." They did not have to wait long. 3 days later, Preston was working in the barn when he heard horses again. He grabbed his rifle and stepped out carefully but relaxed when he saw Judge Turner riding at the head of a group of territorial marshals. "Cole," Turner called out. "Is your wife here?" "I am here," Nora said, emerging from the house. "Good," Turner said, dismounting. "I wanted you both to hear this directly. Marcus Dennison was arrested in Sacramento yesterday. He is being held pending trial for fraud, conspiracy, and attempted kidnapping. The men he sent after you, the ones who attacked you initially, have also been identified and are being hunted down." "What about the men who attacked my uncle's wagon?" Nora asked. "The ones who killed him?" "We believe they were the same men Dennison sent here," Turner said gently. "Based on the descriptions you gave Preston, and what we have learned from our investigation, it appears Dennison hired them to intercept your wagon. The plan was to kill your uncle and claim you, making it look like you had no other choice but to honor the supposed contract. When you survived and escaped, he sent them to find you." Nora swayed and Preston caught her, supporting her weight. "He killed my uncle," she whispered, "over a lie, over a contract that was not even real." "I am sorry," Turner said, "but justice will be served. Dennison will hang for murder, and his hired men with him when we catch them." Preston helped Nora into the house and settled her on the bed. She was shaking, overcome by the revelation. He held her while she cried, mourning her uncle properly now that she knew the full truth of his death. "He was trying to protect me," she said when the tears finally stopped. "Even at the end, if he had just paid back the loan, none of this would have happened." "You cannot know that," Preston said gently. "Dennison might have found another way. Men like that do not give up easily when they want something." "But at least my uncle would still be alive," Nora said. Preston did not have an answer for that. Instead, he just held her, offering what comfort he could. Eventually, exhaustion claimed her and she slept. Preston watched over her, his hand resting protectively on her stomach where their child grew. The trial took place 2 months later in Virginia City. Preston and Nora traveled there to testify, though Nora was reluctant to face Dennison again. But she held her head high in the courtroom, telling her story clearly and without flinching. Preston testified as well, describing finding her chained to the wagon, the attack by Dennison's men, all of it. Dennison was a handsome man in his 40s, well-dressed and confident even in chains. He maintained his innocence throughout the trial, claiming Nora had promised to marry him and then broken her word. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. The forged contract, the testimony of witnesses who had seen him hiring the killers, the attack on Preston's ranch. The jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a guilty verdict. Dennison was sentenced to hang, along with the 3 surviving members of his gang who had been captured. Preston and Nora did not stay to watch the sentence carried out. They had seen enough death. The ride back to the ranch was quiet. Nora sat in front of Preston on his horse, his arms around her, her hands resting on the small swell of her belly that was just beginning to show. "Is it wrong that I am not sorry he is dead?" she asked as they crossed into familiar territory. "No," Preston said. "He killed your uncle and tried to enslave you. Whatever else he was, he earned his fate." "I suppose," Nora said. She was quiet for a moment, then added, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been? If you had ridden a different route that day, if you had not found me." "I try not to," Preston admitted. "It is too terrible to imagine." "I would have died," Nora said simply. "Chained to that wheel in the desert, and you would still be alone in your ranch, living half a life." "Then I guess we saved each other," Preston said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the sky in those same oranges and purples that had colored the sky the day they met. But everything was different now. Where there had been loneliness, there was companionship. Where there had been emptiness, there was love. And soon there would be new life. Preston helped Nora down from the horse and they stood together in the yard, looking at the small house that had become their home. "I have been thinking," Nora said. "When the baby comes, we are going to need more space. Maybe we could add a room or 2. "We could," Preston agreed. "I was thinking the same thing. And maybe expand the barn, add some milk cows. We could start selling butter and cheese in town, bring in some extra income." "You are thinking long-term," Nora observed with a smile. "Of course I am," Preston said. "This is our home, our life. I want to build something lasting here, for us, for our children." "Children, plural," Nora teased. "If we are blessed with more," Preston said seriously. "I grew up in a house full of boys. It was loud and chaotic, but it was good. I would like that for our children if it is meant to be." Nora leaned into him, resting her head on his shoulder. "I would like that too," she said softly. The months passed. Nora's belly grew round with their child, and Preston fussed over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less. Nora tolerated his hovering with amused patience, though she continued to do what she could around the ranch. She was not fragile, she reminded him regularly, just pregnant. They expanded the house as planned, Preston working through the summer to add 2 new rooms. Nora helped when she could, though mostly she focused on preparing for the baby's arrival. She sewed tiny clothes, assembled a cradle from wood Preston had planed smooth, washed and folded blankets until everything was ready. The baby came in late October, as the first snows were threatening in the mountains. Nora's labor was long and hard, attended by a midwife from Genoa who had ridden out when Preston sent word. Preston paced outside the bedroom door for hours, listening to Nora's cries and feeling utterly helpless. Finally, as dawn was breaking, he heard a new sound. A baby's cry, thin and strong. The midwife opened the door, smiling. "You have a son," she said. "A healthy boy. Your wife is tired but well." Preston rushed into the room to find Nora propped up in bed, pale and exhausted but smiling. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in one of the blankets she had made. Preston approached slowly, awed by the sight. "Come meet your son," Nora said softly. Preston sat carefully on the edge of the bed and looked down at the baby. He was red-faced and wrinkled, with a tuft of dark hair and eyes that were trying to focus. As Preston watched, the baby's tiny hand escaped the blanket and waved in the air. Without thinking, Preston offered his finger and the baby's hand closed around it with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Preston whispered. "He is," Nora agreed. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names but never settled on one. Now, looking at his son, Preston thought of his own father, a hard man but a fair one who had taught him the value of honest work. "What about Samuel?" he suggested. "After my father." "Samuel Cole," Nora said, testing the name. "I like it." "Samuel Preston Cole. You want to give him my name too, of course," Nora said. "You are his father. And Samuel Preston Cole is a strong name, a good name for a boy who will grow up in the West." Preston leaned over and kissed her gently. "Thank you," he said. "For him, for everything. I never thought I could be this happy." "Neither did I," Nora said, her eyes shining with tears. "A year ago I was chained to a wagon wheel, waiting to die. Now I have a husband I love, a son, a home. It is more than I ever dreamed possible." Samuel grew quickly, as babies do. He was a healthy, happy child, curious about everything. Preston found fatherhood suited him. He loved teaching Samuel things, showing him the ranch, the animals, the wide Nevada sky. Nora bloomed as a mother, patient and loving, singing to Samuel as she rocked him, reading to him even before he could understand the words. 2 years after Samuel was born, Nora told Preston she was pregnant again. This time, a daughter arrived the following spring, a tiny girl with Nora's green eyes and Preston's dark hair. They named her Margaret, after Nora's mother. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable rhythm. Preston expanded his cattle operation, hired a few hands to help with the work now that the ranch was growing. Nora started that butter and cheese business they had talked about, and it proved profitable. They saved money, improved the house and barn, bought more land. Samuel grew into a bright, energetic boy who followed his father everywhere, peppering him with questions and trying to help with the ranch work. Margaret was quieter but no less bright, with a stubborn streak a mile wide that made both her parents laugh. When she decided she wanted something, there was no dissuading her. 3 years after Margaret's birth, Nora was pregnant again. Twin boys arrived that time, robust and loud from the moment they entered the world. They named them Daniel and David, and the house that had once been so quiet and lonely rang with the sounds of children playing, arguing, laughing. Preston sometimes stood in the yard in the evening, watching his children play while Nora prepared dinner, and marveled at how much his life had changed. He thought back to that day he had found Nora in the desert, chained and waiting to die, and wondered at the strange paths life took. If he had ridden a different route, if he had been an hour earlier or later, none of this would exist. His children would not exist. The love he shared with Nora would not exist. But he had been there at exactly the right moment, and she had been brave enough to survive until he arrived, and together they had built this life. "What are you thinking about?" Nora asked, coming to stand beside him. She was 35 now, with some silver threading through her dark hair and laugh lines around her eyes. Preston thought she was more beautiful than ever. "Just remembering," Preston said, putting his arm around her waist. "That day I found you. Our anniversary is coming up," Nora said. 15 years. 15 years, Preston repeated. "Feels like yesterday and forever ago all at once." "Do you ever regret it?" Nora asked. "Taking me in, marrying me, all of it." Preston turned to look at her fully. "Never, not for one moment." "You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Nora Cole. You and our children, this life we built together." Nora smiled, that same smile that had captivated him all those years ago. "You saved my life that day, but you did more than that. You gave me a reason to live, a home, a family, love. Everything I have is because of you." "No," Preston said firmly. "Everything we have is because of us, because you were strong enough to survive, because we both took a chance on each other, because we chose to build something real together." Samuel called out then, needing help with something, and the moment passed. But as Preston walked over to help his son, Nora by his side, he felt that same sense of rightness he had felt on their wedding day. This was where he belonged. This was home. The years continued to pass. Their children grew, learned, thrived. Samuel became a skilled rancher, taking on more responsibility as Preston got older. Margaret married a young lawyer from Virginia City and moved to town, though she visited often with her own growing family. The twins, inseparable as always, decided to try their luck in California, seeking their fortunes in the lumber trade. Preston and Nora grew old together, their hair turning silver, their bodies slowing but their love never dimming. They spent their evenings on the porch of the house Preston had built so long ago, watching the sun set over the mountains, holding hands like newlyweds. "You remember what you said to me?" Nora asked one evening, her voice soft with memory. "That first day when you freed me from the chain." "I said you were coming home with me," Preston said, the memory as clear as if it had been yesterday. "And I did," Nora said, squeezing his hand. "I came home with you, and I have been home ever since." Preston brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, the simple gold band he had given her 53 years ago still on her finger. "Always," he said. "You will always be home with me." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars came out, two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together through love and determination. The ranch stretched out around them, still thriving under Samuel's care. Grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. It was a good life, Preston thought. A life worth living. All because he had ridden a particular route on a particular day and found a woman chained to a wagon wheel, waiting for someone to save her. Or maybe, he thought, looking at Nora's profile in the fading light, maybe she had saved him too. Either way, they had saved each other. And in doing so, they had created something beautiful. A family, a legacy, a love story that would outlast them both. As night fell over the Nevada desert, Preston Cole held his wife's hand and knew with absolute certainty that he would do it all again. Every hard moment, every challenge, every fear. Because it had all led him here, to this porch, to this woman, to this life. And that, he thought, was worth everything. Years later, when Preston was 78 and Nora 73, they celebrated their anniversary much as they always did, with their children and grandchildren gathered around. Samuel had taken over the ranch completely now, running it with the same care and dedication Preston had shown. Margaret's children were grown, some with children of their own. The twins had returned from California, successful and ready to settle down near their family again. The celebration was loud and joyful, exactly the kind of gathering Preston had once dreamed of having in his lonely years before Nora. But as the evening wore on, Preston and Nora slipped away to their favorite spot on the porch, watching the familiar sunset paint the sky. 55 years, Nora said wonderingly. "Can you believe it?" "With you, I can believe anything," Preston said, his voice rougher with age but still warm with love. Nora leaned her head on his shoulder, fitting perfectly against him as she had for over half a century. "I've been thinking about that day you found me. How scared I was, how sure I was going to die. And then you appeared like something out of a story." "Just a cowboy riding home," Preston said. "My cowboy," Nora corrected. "You looked at me chained and broken, and you saw someone worth saving. Someone worth loving." "That is because you were," Preston said firmly. You are, always. They sat in silence for a while, comfortable in each other's presence as only people who have spent a lifetime together can be. Around them, the sounds of their family filled the evening air, proof of the life they had built together. "No regrets?" Preston asked, echoing the question Nora had asked him so many years ago. "Not a single one," Nora said without hesitation. "Every moment, every struggle, every joy, it all brought us here. How could I regret any of it?" "I love you," Preston said, the words as true now as they had been the first time he said them. "I love you too," Nora replied. "Always and forever." The sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant colors, and Preston Cole thought about the strange and wonderful journey his life had been. From a lonely cowboy riding through the desert to a man surrounded by love and family. All because he had stopped to help a woman in need. All because she had been brave enough to survive. All because they had both been willing to take a chance on love. Preston died peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Nora holding his hand. She followed him 6 months later, unable to bear being without the man who had saved her life and given her everything. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch, under the wide Nevada sky they had both loved. Their children and grandchildren continued the legacy they had started. The ranch thrived for generations, the story of how it began passed down through the family. The story of a lonely cowboy who found a woman chained to a wagon wheel and said, "You are coming home with me." The story of how that simple act of kindness and courage had blossomed into a love that lasted a lifetime and beyond. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the mountains in shades of orange and purple, family members would sometimes swear they could see two figures sitting on the old porch, holding hands and watching the sky. A cowboy and his wife, together even in death as they had been in life. Their love story became legend in the area, told and retold until no one was quite sure anymore what was fact and what was embellishment. But the core truth remained, unchangeable and pure. Two people had found each other when they needed it most, had chosen love even when circumstances seemed insurmountable, and had built a life together that enriched not just themselves but everyone around them. The house Preston built still stood a century later, carefully preserved by descendants who understood its significance. The wagon wheel, the one Nora had been chained to, was found years after Preston's death, recovered from the desert where it had lain for decades. It was brought to the ranch and mounted above the fireplace, a reminder of where their story began. Visitors to the ranch, particularly those interested in the history of the Nevada territory, would often ask about the wheel, and whoever was giving the tour would tell the story. About the lonely cowboy and the woman he found. About how he had freed her from her chains and brought her home. About how that home became filled with love and laughter and life. About how, sometimes, the darkest moments can lead to the brightest futures. About how love, real love, can survive anything. The story of Preston and Nora Cole became more than just family history. It became a testament to the enduring power of compassion, courage, and love. It reminded people that even in the hardest times, even when all seems lost, there is always hope. There is always the possibility of rescue, of redemption, of new beginnings. Their great-great-grandchildren would eventually write a book about them, carefully researched and lovingly told. It became a bestseller, introducing Preston and Nora's story to a new generation. People from all over the country came to visit the ranch, to see where this remarkable love story had unfolded. But for those who lived there, who called the ranch home, Preston and Nora were more than just a story. They were family. They were the foundation upon which everything else was built. Their love had created a legacy that went far beyond land or money or success. It was a legacy of family, of loyalty, of standing by the people you love no matter what. The ranch continued to thrive, each generation adding their own chapter to the story while honoring the beginning. And every year, on the anniversary of the day Preston found Nora, the family would gather. They would tell the story again, keeping it alive, making sure it was never forgotten, because it was a story worth remembering. A story that proved love could triumph over the darkest circumstances. A story that showed how one act of kindness, one moment of courage, could change everything. Preston Cole had been a lonely cowboy, riding through the Nevada desert on his way home. He could have ignored the overturned wagon, could have ridden past, minded his own business, stayed safe and uninvolved. But he had not. He had stopped, he had helped. And in doing so, he had found the other half of his soul. Nora had been broken, chained, waiting to die. She could have given up hope, let the desert claim her. But she had not. She had survived. She had fought. And when rescue came, she had been brave enough to trust, to hope, to love. Together, they had proven that sometimes the best things in life come from the most unexpected places. That love does not always arrive in convenient packages at convenient times. That the person meant for you might be found in the most unlikely circumstances. Their story was proof that happily ever after was not just a fairy tale ending. It was real. It was possible. It took work and courage and commitment, but it was absolutely, completely real. And so the legacy of Preston and Nora Cole lived on, generation after generation, a shining example of what love could accomplish. Their story, which began with chains and despair, had transformed into one of freedom and hope. What started with a dying woman in the desert had blossomed into a family tree that spread across the country, each branch carrying the strength and love of its roots. The ranch they had built together still stood, a monument to their love and determination. The land they had worked still produced. The home they had filled with laughter still echoed with the voices of their descendants. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Preston and Nora Cole were together still, watching over the legacy they had created, knowing that their love had made a difference that would last forever. Their story, the story of a lonely cowboy and the woman he found chained to a wagon wheel, the woman he brought home and made his wife, was complete. It had a beginning filled with despair and violence, a middle filled with growth and challenge and triumph, and an ending filled with love, family, and the certainty that what they had built together would endure long after they were gone. It was, in every sense of the word, a love story for the ages. A Wild West romance that proved love could conquer all. That two people, brought together by chance or fate or providence, could build something beautiful and lasting from even the darkest beginnings. And if you listened carefully on quiet evenings, when the wind blew just right across the Nevada desert, you could almost hear it. The echo of a promise made so long ago. You are coming home with me. Words that had changed two lives forever. Words that had started a legacy. Words that proved beyond any doubt that love was the greatest adventure of all, the end.